Kia ora koutou. It is my pleasure to open the afternoon sessions. It was great to see all the conversation buzzing around some nice food in the break. Really excited about this session entitled Designing Research for Impact. Just a little note to the speakers. I really took note of Tom's very strict chairing this morning, so we'll keep you on time in this session as well. First up, we have Nadia Charania from the School of Public Health and Interdisciplinary Studies. She's going to be talking about international impact, designing and undertaking research that makes a difference.
Thank you. Tēnā koutou, ko Nadia taku ingoa. My name is Nadia Charania, and as Mangor mentioned, I'm a senior lecturer in public health, and I'm also one of the co-directors of the Migrant and Refugee Health Research Center. And just a little shameless plug, our center will be in stand number 1 after this. So come take a look and have a chat with us. So I was asked by Nick to talk a little bit about how I've conceptualized research impact and approached it in my studies to design and undertake research that makes a difference. So I thought what I would do is talk a little bit about how I've conceptualized impact and pull a little bit from my research, some of the steps that I feel like our team has taken to maximize the impact that our research has had. Yes. Okay, so as researchers, as you all know, we're increasingly being asked to demonstrate the impact of our research. And to this end, I find myself asking myself, what is research impact and how do I do it? So I just wanted to start by saying I think the word impact can have this connotation of like a collision, and it can infer this like one-way knowledge transfer. But I would really encourage us to think more about it by being inspired by American women's rights advocate Margaret Fuller, who says, if you have knowledge, let others light their candles from it. And I really like that, and particularly this picture, because as you can see, it's two like candles already having their own light. So it's not like as if we have a candle with information and that we like share it to someone who has nothing. It's more about how can we kind of share that knowledge and make, I don't know, like a brighter flame. I'm still working on the visual, but hopefully you all get the point. So we know that research impact is really important because we want to address societal issues, hopefully reduce inequities we're seeing. We want to drive policy, practice, change. And obviously we want to show that research is important and valuable, and therefore you should fund it and keep funding it. So the key question we ask ourselves is, how do we make, how will my research make a real difference? And what we're referring to is a difference in the real world. And I know that us as academics, we live in the real world, yes. But there's a whole world outside of academia, as we know from the amazing panels that we've been hearing today. So really, it's about making a difference in people's lives. And for me personally, this really resonates because I have a background in participatory research. And so doing research that's locally relevant, that addresses a topic that's particularly important to a community, and then producing tangible benefits that the community wanted is really at the heart of a lot of the work that I do. So I've come across many different examples of research impact. And so I came across this, and I can't remember which one of my mentors, but I think we're just going to give the credit to Leslie Firkins, woo, who talks about Professor Mark Reed's work, which is a really great handbook about research impact. And I found this really useful to go through the different types of impact, just to kind of spark, an idea of what impact could look like. So there's, understanding and awareness impact, so changing people's understanding or awareness about a certain issue. Maybe it's about changing attitudes. Economic, I think that, kind of goes without more explanation. Health and well-being, policy changes, and so on. I think one of the ones I also really like here is the capacity or preparedness. So Maybe it's capacity building in your team. Maybe it's changing our preparedness so that we're ready for a future scenario or something like that. So there's lots of different ways to conceptualize the types of impact. Okay, so we have the privilege of researchers, of knowing the latest research, because we did it, yay. And so it's really part of our role to communicate that research, but also to drive impact from it. So often thinking about the dissemination aspect, but also the impact aspect. But typically, as we've been talking about today, we usually focus on academic avenues like journal articles or conference presentations. And these are obviously super important, but they might not reach all of the target audiences or stakeholders that you need to for your particular research project. So for me, these are some things that come to my mind when I think about impact. So the first one is to plan. Be really intentional on building impact into your study. So us as researchers, we're amazing at coming up with really cool research objectives and study questions and all that cool stuff, and really innovative designs and methodologies to address those study aims. But maybe what we could also be doing is thinking about impact objectives and specific activities to reach those activities or to reach those impacts. So maybe actually creating a whole impact plan. And some things to consider would be who are your stakeholders that could benefit either directly or indirectly from your research. Also thinking, beyond academia. What are the specific activities that you would like to do or that would be important to your stakeholders? And what would be the budget required? What would be the time frame? There's short term, medium, long term, and so on, and maybe even generations to come. We often also think about the intended impacts that we want, but I really encourage us as researchers to think about any of those potential unintended consequences. And if any of those arise, how might we mitigate that? And the last one would just be maybe some geographical distribution. So I think for us, we might think very locally, but I encourage us, maybe we can think regional, nationally, internationally. So, yeah. The second point there is just about engaging and sustaining, and I think this really resonates with what's been said today, and I think that's the pleasure of presenting at the last session as I just get to recap all the wonderful points people have already said. But it really is about relationships. So once you know who your stakeholders are, get in really early, build those relationships, sustain those relationships, figure out what's their motivations, what's really important to them, and then obviously us being open to that changing, because we know that our stakeholders might change, their priorities might change, and so on, and so we need to be really adaptable. And the last point there is just action. So do it, be accountable for what you said you were going to do. Really prioritize the impact activities. But it's okay to be transparent and honest if things are taking longer than expected, and I think that happens to all of us. We plan these lovely plans, and then it usually takes double or triple the amount of time and budget sometimes. So, yeah. Okay, so I'll just go through a couple of examples that I think hopefully show impact. So this is one of the projects that was led by Professor Gail Pacheco, who's there in the back. Hello. So this is an HRC project focused on the ethnic differences in the uptake of early childhood health services. So we focused on GP, dental, and immunizations. And I think what was really special about this project is there was an incredible advisory team that guided this study. And they were like the key stakeholders in those areas. And so we got a really good sense of what was locally relevant, what was most important, and so on. And so as you can see, journal articles were published. We did lots of conference presentations. We also, what was really cool, we had stakeholder HUIs and very specific presentations. So one of them was to immunizers, because this was a huge aspect of improving immunization service delivery. We published reports, we did policy briefs, we used the information in the conversation, we did media interviews, social media posts. But I think the coolest one that came out of this one was informing a national immunization campaign. So what ended up happening was Gail was doing her thing and had a wonderful media interview. and then was approached by Te Whatu Ora to do some additional research. And it was really cool because they knew that we were already doing this research, and why duplicate when they could complement the research we were already doing. And so this was focused on understanding the perspectives from Māori Mama about immunizations for their pepe and tamariki. And Te Whatu Ora also ended up hiring a Māori-led design agency in tandem, and they actually co-designed immunization resources. So these are two of the freely available resources that are now available. One is Puka Puka, a book called Piwari the Kaitiaki, and it's just like an immunization book. And the other one is an immunization schedule that is inspired by the Maramataka, the Māori lunar calendar. So quite beautiful. So the other example there is another HRC-funded project that focused on immunization inequities for migrant and refugee background children. And similar to the previous study, this one had a really great advisory group that supported the project and did all the usual things like journal articles. This one was really great. Master's students were involved with this project, so we had dissertations and theses coming out of this too. Conference presentations, yada, 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 yada. What was really cool is I've built a relationship with the principal advisor of the National Immunization Program, so they come into us now to talk about our research and how that could inform the national program. And the other one that came out of this, which was interesting and I thought I would highlight, is there's a real need to support our vaccinators with immunizing people with migrant and refugee backgrounds. And so what I did is I'm collaborating with researchers in Australia, and we developed an online training module for vaccinators to improve their service delivery for those with migrant and refugee backgrounds. It was a lot of work. So it's currently being piloted right now. And then we hope to make it freely available across Aotearoa and Australia. And we've already had interest from researchers in Canada and the UK to potentially modify it and then scale it up in those countries as well. So that's very exciting. Okay. Good timing? No, okay. Yes. Okay, so this is a new project that's coming up also with the wonderful Gail and her team at the New Zealand Policy Research Institute. So this one is going to be applying complexity science to improve early childhood immunization services. And so once again, just with those things that we've been talking about in terms of planning, so this one was developed in collaboration with our advisory group members. And once again, like they represent all those kind of key areas that we're interested in. And so we're really hoping that the way that it's been developed will address what they think is most important. So we thought about who would benefit from our research, what would be our impact activities, what would be the time frames and the geographic distribution of our project. In terms of engaging and sustaining, as I said, we've created really strong links with our advisory group, but also with the communities that we're focusing on. And it really helps us get a sense of what motivates them, what's important to them. And what was really great about this team is that a lot of the members on the team themselves and on the advisory group are knowledge brokers or like really great connectors. So they themselves are like really well respected and connected in their own spaces. And so I think for us that can really help us like efficiently, kind of share information and also hopefully drive impact. And then with the action, stay tuned. Hopefully we'll do some cool stuff. The big thing that we hope will come from this is like interventions to improve childhood immunization rates, particularly in the wake of COVID, which we know has been an issue. So just to wrap it up, so some of the key takeaways from my perspective, hopefully it's of interest, is one of my mentors always tells me that if you get the process right, the results will follow. And so for me, that really guides a lot of this work. So for me, it's really about prioritizing it, so doing it early, but doing it also throughout. I think it's really easy to think about dissemination and impact at the end of a research project. But why not think about what things you could produce throughout the actual research project that could be useful? Plan for a variety of activities, so different mediums, visual, we've been talking about infographics and so on. Think about what might go wrong. It's real life, and then how might you manage that with your team? In terms of the next point, so connecting, it's all about relationships. So, find those people, build those relationships, sustain those relationships, nurture them. And for me, it's really thinking about not just the usual the suspects, right? Like we have the big organizations that are usually at the table and, probably have a lot of power in the policymaking space. But who are those groups and stakeholders that we might not be hearing from as often? Can we be really intentional about who we're talking to make sure that we're creating space for those voices? And also in terms of the connect is to really understand the research context. So to do lots of listening and learning and observing. And what Brett was saying earlier about even the broader research context that your specific research might be sitting within. And the last one there is mostly advice to myself to be realistic. It's a super time-consuming process, as all of you know. So resource it properly, which I know we can't really do because we have lots of constraints, but do the best we can. The research hopefully will drive some sort of change and just be okay that some of those priorities and so on might change. So I think just be realistic about the whole process. So that is all from me. Thank you very much. Hopefully that was helpful.
That was fantastic, Nadia. A little present for
Thank
you
you.
as well. We do have time for a question if anyone has a question.
I'm going to slowly back away.
That's good. All right. Thank you again, Nadia. That was fantastic. So next up we have Daniel O'Brien and Richard Ellis from the School of Clinical Sciences. They would talk about moving knowledge to the people, the journey of Aotearoa's Osteoarthritis Guidebook.
Anoho ahau kei te raki pai whenua, ko Ngāti Pākehā te iwi, ko Kate taku hoa wahine, ko Jake ko Lila taku ingoa, ko Richard taku ingoa. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. My name is Richard Ellis. I wear a number of hats here at AUT. The hat that I'm wearing today is the lead of Whai Whakaoranga Aotearoa, or otherwise known as Active Living and Rehabilitation Aotearoa, and otherwise known as ALARA, which is our amazing research group. I'll let my partner in crime introduce himself. We're the only dynamic duo today, so we thought we'd introduce ourselves first, and then we'll talk about the great guidebook.
Kia ora everybody and welcome along today. Ko Waitakere toku pai moanga, ko Karamatura taku awa, ko Titirangi taku tūrangi waiwai, ko O'Brien taku whānau, ko Daniel ahau. And I always think that's a really more flash way of saying, kia ora guys, I'm Daniel from West Auckland. So, and on that note, I'll hand over to Rich and I'll join you shortly.
Okay, kia ora. Thanks, Dan. So I'm going to provide a little bit of context for the Aotearoa Osteoarthritis Guidebook, but what I would like to start the presentation by saying is that we will finish talking about the amazing whānau that we had along the ride on this journey, but this was a particularly special research collaboration with the team at Good Health Design here at AUT and also with Arthritis New Zealand. So the NICE guidelines is a group in the UK, so the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, and in 2015 they published a guideline for osteoarthritis in over 16's diagnosis and management, and this was updated again in 2022. And one of the key things that is in this guideline, they identify three fundamental or core management approaches or management strategies for helping people with osteoarthritis. The first being therapeutic exercise, the second being weight management where appropriate, and the third being information and support. And it's this third one that I'd really like to talk about today in regard to the osteoarthritis guidebook. Like many great pieces of research, often the genesis is over a meal and a beer. And so this is a picture of Daniel and myself with our collaborators that were part of the project, Jennifer Baldwin and Johnny Quick. And we were also part of a research group that published this paper in the New Zealand Medical Journal, which was a kind of an introductory discussion paper about the need for trying to realise a model of care for the management of osteoarthritis in Aotearoa. And so over this, this lunch that we had, which incidentally was literally about a week or 10 days before COVID hit, I think Johnny only just managed to get back to the UK in time before the UK went into lockdown. We really thought, well, one of the key pieces of work that we could move forward with as a group will be the piece around patient education and information. Now, through the talk today, we're going to have a couple of photographs of some of the amazing students that went on the ride with us. To be able to get to the guidebook in its final version, we were helped by an enormous whānau, but we had some very, very clever and amazing students that came along with us. This is Lucy Metcalf. At the time, she was a fourth-year physiotherapy student. She's proudly holding her certificates. She was the winner of the M.L. Roberts Prize for this piece of work I'm just about to talk to, which is the best fourth-year research prize for the undergraduate physiotherapy course of her particular year. And what we asked Lucy to do was to go and do a search for us about patient education resources that were out there. And so she undertook a scoping review of grey literature where she just went searching the world for patient education resources in the osteoarthritis space. What she found was 6 guidebooks that were published by NGOs of a number of different countries, at least 5 or 6, I think there were at least 2 from one, so maybe 5 different countries, and 68 additional standalone resources. So the standalone resources may have just been things like patient information brochures or pamphlets or other things that popped up on the internet. What she did is she extracted data from the resources that she found, but using the NICE guidelines as her mechanism for extracting the data. And so she was looking at first-line treatments, primary care treatments, second-line treatments, tertiary care or third-line treatments. She was looking for information around the interprofessional team and anything else that caught her eye. And the other key thing that we wanted her to go looking for was any elements in and around design. So the next part of the ambition was to take forward Lucy's work and then work out a methodology that was reasonable for us to achieve this aim. So our aim was to develop an osteoarthritis guidebook that was suitable for people living with osteoarthritis in Aotearoa, New Zealand. It was very deliberate and intended to make sure that this guidebook resonated for people in New Zealand. And I'll pass over to Dan.
Kia ora, thank you. Mangle, I haven't been looking at the time, so you need to give me a nod when you want me to stop talking, because I love talking about this stuff. I was thinking about something that Nadia said before, when that was, your timelines. We sold the team on this being a 12-month project, and I think we published it 3 years later. So, good research takes time, as you say. And I think the next one talks you through or steps you through the process that we took to pull this thing together. And as I say, it literally did take us 3 years to get from start to finish. We worked with literally dozens of people with lived experience, clinicians, advocacy groups, people who are enrolled with the frameworks of health delivery in New Zealand. I think this has probably been reviewed or peer-reviewed by a few dozen people. It's definitely been peer-reviewed 10 times more than anything else Richard and I have ever published. So you think it's hard to get something into a journal, you try and get it past 25 OA, people living with OA, because they'll tell you what you really think. The other part of the process that I really enjoyed, which was towards the end, was working with Kiriana Nathan, who was a Māori linguist, and he helped us take elements of the content and translate it into te reo in a meaningful way. You can't just translate a lot of these concepts literally because they don't work. So that was a really, really fun experience, and hopefully funding-wise, I don't know where Nick is, we're hoping to translate a short version into full te reo potentially next year. So this is effectively what we created, and the little video will show you all the different pages.
We will have some hard copies at the Alara stand. Here's my unshameful plug. So anyone that wants to come up and pick up the guidebook and flip their way through it, come and find us at the Alara stand.
Yep. And I think being married to a graphic designer meant that she kicked me up the backside right at the start and said, you need to go and talk to the design team right before you start, and that's what we did. And for anyone who's looking to work with design, do it from day one. Do it before you write the grant. Don't wait until the very end and look for some pretty pictures, because it changed lots of the things we did. So we got to the end of the project, we produced it, and I think on the day we published it, I said to a couple of people, oh, this is good, but we need a short version now. And they're like, oh, can we just stop? We finished this project, can we have a break? No, we need a short version. And what it was when we were doing one of the co-design workshops, a colleague of mine who is based out in Middlemore said to me, this is awesome, but I need something for ED. Yeah, I need something to give to somebody when they come in to ED. It seems crazy to think people turn up to ED with osteoarthritis, but it does happen in New Zealand because our GP is so expensive. And so that was our motivation to go and create a short version, which is what we did. Blake did the vast amount of the mahi on this one. He was an honours student for us and also a final year physiotherapy student. And what we did is we gave them the existing book as loose leaves to the participants who came to our co-design workshop down the Bay of Plenty. And this one was a bit tough for me. I said, cut it all up. Pull out the pages you like, pull out the bits you like, cut it up and put it on a poster and show us what you would really want. And this is one of the posters they created. And ironically, this poster contains almost all of the things that went into the final version. So clearly, as researchers, we actually didn't need to do most of the mahi. We let our participants do it, which was quite cool. And again, this might play, we'll see. No, didn't. You can come and have a look at the QR code for the short version a little bit later. And I'm mindful of time, Mangor, so I'll wrap this up nice and quick. So as I said before, we've had dozens of people peer review this work, more than anything else we've done. That number of 1,000 copies is apparently a little bit low now. So this is in the Te Whatuora print system. The orthopaedic departments around the country can print this out of their own budgets, etc. The e-version has been viewed a few thousand times now, which is pretty amazing. The short version is catching up. It's not quite there yet, but it's catching up with its views. We're in the process of developing a version in Samoan, and we've got ideas around a Tongan version and a Māori version. And I think I've got one final slide that says these are all the amazing people who are involved in this kaupapa, and too many to count. Perfect. Kia ora, guys.
Kia ora.
Thank you so much, Daniel and Richard. Got a little present for you as well. We also have time for a question.
Oh,
If there's any questions in there.
You can grab that on behalf. Oh, look, we've both got one.
Yeah.
Thank you. Kia ora.
Oh, that was beautiful. Thank you so much. Next up in our session, we have Michael Fielding speaking on behalf of Jack Chen. This project is a venture, pun intended, between the Ventures and the School of Sciences. It's called Sverlus, From Radical Idea to Industry Disruption. Sounds interesting.
Kia ora, Mangor. Are we ready for this to work? Oh yeah, here we go. My name is Michael Fielding. Many of you, and I'm going to stand over here partly to spare your necks and also to check out whether these really fancy cameras will follow me, which I was told they would, but it looks like they haven't. But your heads are much smarter than the cameras. Many of you may know me, and you should know AUT Ventures. So AUT Ventures is a subsidiary of the university. We're wholly owned by the university, which means that we inherit the charitable purpose of the university, which is about education, research, and impact on communities. I actually head up AUT Ventures. I'm the chief executive, so we are set up as a business. And you'll probably be wondering why I'm presenting what's essentially a science presentation. The reason is that Jack is away. But also, I am only part-time as AUT Ventures Chief Executive because about a year ago I made the decision, requested that my board let me step out of that role for some of the week and work as an unpaid co-founder to set up a business to commercialise this technology with Jack, which is something that I've been working on with him before I was made Chief Executive of AUT Ventures, when I was a lowly commercialisation manager. But this is the guy, the real hero of the story. Jack at the moment is in Italy as part of his joint appointment between the University of Siena and at AUT. And what he was working on back in 2017, and I want to walk you through the journey here, was these things visualized here of gold. This is very sensitive. Gold nanoparticles. So these are particles that are absolutely tiny, and they're coated on one side with a material which makes them lipophilic. So these are called Janus particles. So Janus is the Roman god of doors and windows, and is usually portrayed with one head facing in and one head facing out. And so these Janus particles are a known thing, and back in 2017, Jack was doing research on gold nanoparticles. And what he was interested in is whether these things could be used as surfactants. Now, I'm not a chemist, and many of you will be, so just for those who aren't chemists, a surfactant stands for surface active agent, and it's a type of material or a molecule that has one end that likes water and one end that likes oil. So lipophilic and hydrophilic, we call them amphiphilic. It's really sensitive. Either that or I wave around my hands too much. They're used all over the place. If you're washing your hair or your body, your car, the floors, even your toilets, that's using surfactants. If you heard of emulsifiers in food, that's a type of surfactant, and they're used as wetting agents in agriculture, fire-retarding foams, the paint on the walls. You're surrounded by surfactants every day. Your lunch will have been, helped to get to your plate using surfactants. And when Jack said, hey, industry, I've got these really cool gold nanoparticles, and they're really awesome surfactants, they went, it's made out of gold? Yeah, maybe you need to rethink that. So Jack thought, what's the most abundant material that I can think of that would make really great resource that I could make these particles out of? And he came up with cellulose, right? It's the stuff that holds up trees. It's in paper. It's in my socks. It's in my shirt as well, right? It's everywhere. And so back in 2019, he successfully got a National Science Challenge, the funding from SFTI, the Science for Technological Innovation program, and was able to bring on Andreas Tiban, who came from Ecuador, I think. And Andreas was using cellulose from cotton and managed to convert it into little nanoparticles and worked out how to create this stuff. Looks really boring, looks just like normal powdered cotton. But if you were to zoom in, what you would find is that these are tiny, tiny, tiny little particles of cellulose. And if you were able to zoom in even further than a scanning electron microscope, you'd see that they look like this, right? They're a little ball, and one side has been coated. Back then it wasn't with a plant oil, but now we're coating them with plant oils. And that side is lipophilic, so it loves oil, and the cellulose loves water. And these things work really, really well as surfactants. So this is skipping ahead a little bit. I'm just going to skip to this one, because back in 2020 is when I first got involved with this project, and we identified the commercial potential for this, because surfactants are a huge industry. They're a $50 billion US a year industry, and 95% of those surfactants are made from fossil fuels or palm oil, and the rest are made from sugars, which basically competes with our own food chain, right? So basically the industry is desperate for another solution that isn't a fossil fuel, it isn't palm oil, because the orangutans and forest clearances. Gosh, it really does skip easily. I'll just keep really still. And so part of what we did was we said, right, if we are going to commercialize this, we need really good evidence that it works, and comparative evidence. So whereas the research project had been focused on more absolute evidence, right, we were trying to compare it against other types of surfactants, right? And so, yeah, there's quite a lot of work. We did biodegradability testing, we did skin sensitivity testing, and so on. Never works when you want it to. We filed a patent on it. And if there's one thing that you remember out of tonight, if it is not this, today, it's not this thing, it's that if you want to publish something that could be commercializable and it needs patent protection, so that's protection of the intellectual property ideas, please talk to AUT Ventures first, because we need to get a patent filed before you published. And thank goodness Jack did that. Oh dear, here we go. When we did market validation, I'm not actually convinced that it is this. I think it's something else. When we did market validation, we found that the companies we talked to absolutely loved the idea because it ticked the 6 boxes that they needed. And the interesting one there is tunable. So most surfactants, being molecules, actually have one chemistry. You're all familiar with the pH scale. In surfactants, there's something called the HLB scale, the hydrophilicity-lipophilicity balance. You see, I've been doing this for too long. And that determines whether it's more lipophilic or hydrophilic. And these particles, because we're coating one side of them, we can coat slightly more or slightly less of one side, and we can change it. We can tune the particles, and we can also tune the size of them as well, and we can put different oils on the surface. And so they're really tunable, which means we've got a whole platform that can be used for all sorts of different applications. Yeah, so we found that there was a possibility of making it from wood pulp, which is a huge step forward because it's a lot more readily available than. See, I didn't do anything then. A lot more sustainable and available than cotton. And the Kinleith pulp mill down in Tokoroa that they're looking at closing, I've worked out that one pulp mill could supply the entire world's supply of emulsifiers, which is about a $10 billion market from that one pulp mill with our technology. We also found that none of the customers that we spoke to, or potential customers, could agree on whether they wanted olive oil or hemp oil or sunflower oil or canola oil or anything. So thankfully, it turns out it's not very difficult to make them with different sorts of oils. So we've not just got a whole range of different properties, we've got a range of different marketable ingredients. Because if you've got a hair care brand or a skincare brand that likes hemp oil or sunflower oil, we can cater to your needs. We have, at the moment, and just finishing up, around $350,000, I think it is, of funding from KiwiNet, which is ultimately funded by MB. And Jack also, on the back of the commercial work or the commercialization work we were doing, was also able to get an MB Smart Ideas for about $1 million worth of funding. And so that's got, I think, another couple of years to run, another year at least. So in some ways, what I wanted to show here is that the commercial work is woven in with the science work and the funding as well. So really early on, we had got some funding to look at the intellectual property landscape, and that sort of helped get the initial SFTI funding, about $350K. And so everything's kind of built as a lot of science work does, builds on the previous work. And the commercialization was interwoven with that. And of course, MB is about economic development. So they really like the outcome of a commercial business. This one here is probably, how much time have we got, Angor? You've kind of heaps? Yeah. We're supposed to finish at 3:15, but it's 3:20-ish. Is that what you're aiming at? Okay. Our process is really simple, and it is going to be a drop-in replacement that can be formulated fairly similarly to other ingredients. And if you were able before, and if you see this guy Victor with the blue-green bottle there, you can actually be amongst the first people in the world to try this. Now, we have actually had it tested. It is safe, even for sensitive skin. So you could be amongst the first people in the world to try cellulose-based skin lotion, for example, that Victor has formulated with his own fair hands. Our journey is only just beginning. So the part there in the grey is, maybe I should stand over here. The part there in the grey is what we've done so far. So the team's making about 10 grams, maybe it's 8 grams at a time. We're just about to start raising some seed funding. This is all in US dollars because it's quite likely that the investors will be, at least some of them, from overseas. And even the ones that are in New Zealand, I want to keep them honest by showing them that we're looking overseas as well. So the next stage in the green there is to validate that our processes that we're using in the lab can scale up to an industrial scale. Looking initially, our initial production would be around 400 kilograms a batch, so obviously that's a long way from the 10 grams that we're making now. There's some pivotal regulatory barriers that we have to jump, and every country's got different rules. And then later on, we'll be wanting to build a pilot plant, and I'm hoping that actually up until the end of that, what we call Series A round there, the pilot 20 kilos, I'm hoping we can actually stay around AUT, because we need the scanning electron microscope, we need the nuclear magnetic resonance instruments, and we need a bunch of really smart chemists. Obviously, once we get to kind of 400 kilos, it's not going to be at AUT. And we would like actually to be able to subcontract some work back to AUT as well, which will count as ERI, if ERI is even a thing beyond this year. And longer term, hopefully have some plants overseas. But as I say, work out that if we were to acquire one plant, and there's a company that makes textiles, some of you may have heard of Tencel or Lyocell, the company that makes that actually has acquired some whole pulp plants and converted them into making fabrics. We could potentially do the same thing with Spherulose. Yeah, so it's a long journey. I don't know where we might jump off on that journey, because that's like a 10-year journey, which would be quite a long journey. And this is not really a commercialization slide. This is just cool science, because what this is some old particles. They're kind of a bit lumpy and ugly, but these are our Spherulose particles. And Andreas managed to grab an SEM micrograph of these Spherulose particles like surrounding a clump of paraffin wax, which I just think is a really cool picture. Now, most of our ones that we make now are not made in the same way, so they're much more like the nice round ones that you see there. They're not the sort of ugly sausage-shaped things, but I just think that's a really cool photo that shows the stuff is actually working. It's kind of surrounding molecules. Yeah, so we have some time for some questions if there are any, although you're not really a question-asking audience, are you? Sure.
My question, Mangle?
Go for it.
Am I still on? Sweet. Thank you, that was amazing. The thing that caught my eye was the $400 million.
Yeah.
So as AUT researchers,
Yep.
this is going to come across as tongue-in-cheek, but quite seriously,
Yep.
how much are they going to see of $400 million?
How much is AUT going to see, or the researchers?
The researchers.
Okay, so AUT's IP policy, it was called the IP and commercialization policy, says, when staff and students who are working on grants and so on are working on something, then if it's not a book or a publication, then the university owns it. All right? But it also says that the researchers should share in any financial benefits of it. When we commercialise, so I'm talking now probably more with my AUT Ventures hat on, when we commercialise something, we have to transfer the intellectual property into the vehicle that's going to do that, because obviously this is not something that the university is going to do itself. And what we have to keep in mind is there's a bunch of different things. So one is that to make it investable, and this is something that, if I could just divert for a moment, is that we're in the business mostly of commercialization and also consulting and so on, but in terms of commercialization, and that's one form of impact. It's a really important form of impact, I believe, when huge amounts of investment are going to have to be made to get the impact that you want. So for the work that you were doing before, creating hugely valuable materials, that's not appropriate to try and commercialize that. But if we have to get through European regulatory approval and FDA, TSCA, and all of these regulatory approvals around the world, and build factories on this sort of scale, there has to be a commercial business model behind it. And so the investors that are going to put that money in will need to see that a company is set up that's just focused on this one thing, and they'll need to see that the founders have some real commitment and that they're incentivized, and they'll want the institution to have as little as possible. So part of the constant challenge we have is to justify and validate, why does the university have any of this at all? There's a movement from many investors to say, well, you know, you got public money to develop this, why should the university have anything? So in this case, and in fact in previous cases, in all cases, we have to come up with a number that the university owns, and then the founders will own the balance of it, and then investors come in and everybody gets diluted. And in order to make things investable for this sort of scale of project, the investors will just simply walk away. They're just not interested unless the founders have the majority of it, because they'll get watered down later on. And so what ventures have to do is say, okay, and in this case, you know, we're looking at sort of in the range of 15 to 18% for the university. That amount will get watered down, but at the end of the day, that will hopefully be worth some millions of dollars, enough to fund quite a lot of research for many years to come. Of course, it may not work. There may be something that we don't know yet that crops up. I don't know, maybe we can't scale one part of the process. You know, there's a couple that I lie in bed at night thinking, you know, can we really scale this step of the process? Yeah, so the policy, I guess to sum up, is that in order for commercialization to work, and you know what it's like being an academic is a challenging, difficult job at the best of the times, with many, many competing priorities. Commercialization, I always say, is, you know, at best priority 4 after teaching, research, academic citizenship. And then you've got admin. You know, I'm probably going to make some of you come to tears here. Commercialization is way down the list. You know, for some people, maybe it's a little bit higher up. And if there's no incentive to do it, why would you bother, right? Because you're, at the moment, not going to get promoted because of your commercialization. You know, you're going to get promoted for the sorts of impact that you guys are having. Yeah, so there are mechanisms to make it worthwhile, but it's not appropriate for every research. It's not appropriate, not something that every researcher necessarily needs to aspire to. We'd certainly like more people to be interested in it.
That was an amazing answer. I was just after a dollar value.
It has no value at the moment. Because,
okay.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. Probably it was, I should have brought my soapbox. Yeah.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions for Michael? What's the best advice you would give, say, young researchers, someone new to AET? And as you say, it can seem daunting if you have an idea that you think may be commercial product. How do you suggest?
Yeah, so talk to the AET Ventures team, and you know, also think about involving students or PhD students. So one of the other technologies that we spun out a couple of years ago is called Respirac, and it was developed in DCT in the Institute of Biomedical Technologies, or Andrew somewhere in the audience, not that he was directly involved in it, but the institute was. And that company has actually been set up by Professor Al Jamali's PhD student who developed and co-invented that. So actually by nurturing a team, it doesn't mean that you have to kind of leave the university. Jack's not planning on leaving the university. Hannah, if you're here, he's not planning on going. I'm not sure if that's good or bad news, but I'd like to think that it would be bad news if he did leave. Yeah. Talk to us first, yeah. Cool. Good. And it is a long journey.
Got a little token present.
Oh, thank you very much. Good.
So next up we have another one of our 3-minute students presenting their work. Always amazing to see how someone can summarize 3 or 4 or 5 years of work in 3 minutes. So next up we have Waruna Weerasekaria, who's a finalist for the 3-minute competition. It's from the School of Sport and Recreation, and we'll be talking about defensive CGMs, a behavioral approach to diabetes care.
I'd like to invite you to visualize yourself living inside a modern room with no windows and no access to your weather reports. If you were to leave the room and go outside the building for a walk, would you carry an umbrella or raincoat with you? Because there's that possibility it could rain any time. Now compare that to a situation where you can see it raining outside the window. And now if you had to go outside the room for a walk, would you carry an umbrella or raincoat with you? Most of us would, isn't it? I can see you nodding. most of us are likely to show an improved response or the most appropriate behavior if we can see what's happening in real time. And that is exactly the concept I shall explore in my diabetic research. And for this, I'll be using continuous glucose monitors or CGM devices. Now these CGM devices are very cool devices. They're normally worn at the back of your arm, and they provide me with my blood glucose information in real time directly to my phone app. So effectively, CGM devices are giving me a window into my own body. And so my primary question is to see how effective CGM devices are at eliciting the all-important behavioral responses, changes to dietary patterns and/or physical activity levels in diabetic patients. My research is spread across 3 different studies, with the first one being a scoping review. A scoping review is like a reconnaissance mission, where I identify what the gaps are, what methodologies have been deployed already in CGM studies done around the world, and what CGM-related goals are worth pursuing. My second study is where I qualitatively and quantitatively analyze an existing data set of blood glucose and behavioral information obtained from a small sample of diabetic patients. Now, these 2 studies will inform the design and execution of my third and largest study, which is a clinical trial. It is also a randomized controlled trial. In this trial, I shall qualitatively and quantitatively assess the behavioral, clinical, and psychosocial changes you would see in pre-diabetic and diabetic patients who have access to their own CGM data, as opposed to pre-diabetic and diabetic patients who only rely on diabetic education as guidance without any of their own CGM data. For this trial, the primary group of patients I shall recruit as subjects are Mara Pacifica patients, because we know our Mara Pacifica communities are predisposed to type 2 diabetes, and we want to see if we can make an impact there. Type 2 diabetes is a killer disease. It kills 1 every 5 seconds somewhere on Earth. So it is our hope that CGM devices would act as an intervention tool and would be the fence at the top of the diabetic mountain, arresting progression of this condition at the pre-diabetic and diabetic stages, so that we don't have to put up with so many diabetic ambulances at the bottom of this mountain. Thank you for your attention.
Big virtual thank you to Varuna for that great presentation. So, a few things to remind you of going forward here now. So we're going to have our 3rd exhibition going forward from past until we close today. So it's been some great exhibitions already, and I'm sure they will continue. At 4 o'clock, there's an event you certainly cannot miss. We have Sir Richard Full for a fireside chat, and I can personally promise you that that's going to be very, very good. After that, we're going to have nibbles and drinks for another hour until 5:30. So a great time to connect, network, and share our stories. With that, I want to congratulate all the speakers again. That was a fantastic session and made my chairing very easily. So well done. Thank you.